But Marcus wasn't just some kid with a wrench. He was the son of Dr. Elena Chen, a quantum physicist who disappeared 3 years ago after stumbling onto something the government wanted erased. The stupid engine trick wasn't just modified parts. It was his mother's final gift, hidden in equations she'd tattooed onto his ribs before vanishing. When Marcus fired up his bike, the mirrors began spinning impossibly fast, and reality itself seemed to bend around the machine. The other biker's laughter died as his Honda lifted 6 inches off the ground. What happens when a street race becomes a battle for the future of physics itself? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sudden silence was deafening. 20 hardened bikers, who'd seen everything the streets could throw at them, stood frozen as Marcus's bike hovered in defiance of gravity. The mirrors attached to his engine block spun in perfect synchronization, creating a mesmerizing pattern of reflected light that seemed to fold space around itself. Rico's face had gone pale beneath his leather jacket. What the hell? Marcus himself was struggling to process what was happening. He'd built the modification exactly according to his mother's equations, the ones she'd carved into his skin during those final desperate hours before men in black suits came knocking. But he'd never expected it to actually work. The theory was impossible. Quantum entanglement on a macro scale, using crystalline structures to create localized gravitational anomalies. It was the kind of science that existed only in theoretical papers and his mother's brilliant, tortured mind. The bike settled back down with a soft thud, the mirrors gradually slowing their rotation. Marcus's hands shook as he gripped the handlebars, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The complex equations tattooed along his ribs seemed to burn beneath his shirt, as if responding to what they'd just accomplished. "Trick of the light," Rico said, but his voice lacked conviction. The other gang members exchanged nervous glances, their earlier bravado evaporating like smoke. Wires or something. Had to be. Marcus looked up at the assembled bikers, seeing them differently now. For 3 years they'd been his tormentors, the kids who'd made his life hell after his mother disappeared, calling him crazy when he insisted she'd been taken rather than simply abandoning him. They'd mocked his obsession with engines and physics, dismissing him as the weird Asian kid who talked to machines instead of people. "No wires," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying further than it should have in the warehouse's vast space. "No tricks, just science you're too stupid to understand." Rico's face flushed red. "You think you're so smart, Chen? Let's see how smart you are in a race. Tomorrow night, downtown course starting at the harbor bridge. You and that flying circus of yours against my Ducati." The challenge hung in the air like a physical thing. Marcus knew he should be afraid. Rico had never lost a street race, and his bike was worth more than Marcus's foster family made in a year. But something had changed when his machine defied gravity. The equations his mother had hidden in his flesh weren't just theoretical anymore. They were a weapon. "What are the stakes?" Marcus asked. Rico's grin was vicious. "You lose, you give me that freak show engine and disappear from our territory forever. I lose." He paused, clearly not believing that was possible. "I lose, and the Hell Angels leave you alone, permanently." Marcus felt the weight of 3 years of humiliation, of being called a liar about his mother's disappearance, of having his lunch money stolen and his projects destroyed. But more than that, he felt the potential thrumming in his modified engine, the promise of power his mother had literally written into his DNA. "Deal," he said. As the gang mounted their bikes and roared away into the LA night, Marcus remained in the warehouse, staring at his impossible machine. The mirrors had gone completely still, but he could swear they were watching him, reflecting something that wasn't quite his own face. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a number he'd never dared call, a contact his mother had programmed years ago, labeled simply as "when it works." His finger hovered over the call button. Whatever his mother had discovered, whatever had made her disappear, it was awakening now. Tomorrow's race wouldn't just determine his standing with the Hell Angels. It would determine whether Dr. Elena Chen's son was ready for the forces that had swallowed her whole. Marcus pressed the call button and waited for someone to answer. School felt like walking through fog. Teachers' voices became background noise as Jake stared at his notebook, sketching engine diagrams and scrawling calculations that made no sense. The modification should have destroyed his engine block. Instead, it had somehow created more power than his fuel system could theoretically produce. Earth to Greece, monkey. Derek Martinez's voice cut through his thoughts like a serrated blade. Heard your rust bucket actually moved last night. Jake looked up to find Derek looming over his desk, flanked by his usual pack of lackeys. The star quarterback's perfect smile held all the warmth of winter steel. Must have been some other pathetic Honda, Derek continued, loud enough for the entire class to hear, because there's no way your piece of junk could outrun a shopping cart. Snickers rippled through the classroom. Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks, but something else stirred beneath the embarrassment, a strange confidence, as if the engine's impossible energy had somehow transferred to him. Maybe you'd like to find out, Jake heard himself say. The words hung in the air like a challenge thrown down before a medieval duel. Derek's expression shifted from mocking to genuinely surprised, then settled into predatory interest. What did you just say? Jake's heart hammered against his ribs, but he forced himself to meet Derek's stare. You heard me? Boys. Mrs. Patterson's sharp voice cut across the tension. Is there something you'd like to share with the class? Derek straightened, his college scholarship smile sliding back into place. Just discussing automotive theory, Mrs. P. But as the quarterback returned to his seat, he leaned close enough for only Jake to hear. Friday night, warehouse district, midnight. His whisper carried the promise of humiliation. Hope you've got insurance. The rest of the school day blurred past in a haze of anticipation and dread. Jake found himself checking his phone obsessively, watching videos of street races and calculating odds he didn't want to face. Derek drove a modified WRX with more money under the hood than Jake had spent on his entire car. After final bell, he escaped to Murphy's garage, seeking refuge in the familiar smell of motor oil and rust. Old Murphy was elbow-deep in a transmission rebuild, country music competing with the pneumatic hiss of air tools. You look like someone ran over your dog, Murphy observed without looking up from his work. Jake slumped against a workbench. I may have done something incredibly stupid. Stupider than usual? That takes effort. Murphy's weathered face cracked into a grin, but his eyes showed genuine concern when Jake explained about the race. Derek Martinez? Murphy whistled low. That boy's got more horsepower than sense, and that's saying something. He wiped his hands on an oil-stained rag. What's got you thinking you can take him? Jake hesitated. How could he explain what happened last night without sounding completely insane? The way his engine had seemed to drink power from the air itself, the impossible acceleration that had left him pressed, back into his seat like a fighter pilot, pulling G's. I made some modifications, he said finally. Murphy raised an eyebrow. What kind of modifications? Before Jake could answer, the garage's fluorescent lights flickered. For a split second, the shadows seemed to deepen and shift, and he could have sworn he heard something like whispers echoing from the dark corners of the shop. Jake Murphy's voice had gone quiet, serious. What exactly did you do to that engine? The lights stabilized, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Jake glanced around the garage, noting how the shadows fell wrong near his Honda, as if something invisible was bending light around itself. I'm not sure, Jake admitted, but I think I might have made a mistake. Mistakes can be fixed, Murphy said, though uncertainty flickered across his features. Question is whether you want to fix it or see where it leads. Jake stared at his car, remembering the intoxicating rush of impossible speed, the way the engine had sung with power that defied every law of physics he knew. Derek and his crew expected to humiliate him Friday night, to cement Jake's place at the bottom of the high school food chain. But what if they were wrong? What if the grease monkey had finally built something that could bite back? "I guess I'll find out Friday," Jake said. Murphy nodded slowly, but as Jake headed for his car, the old mechanic called out, "Boy, be careful. Some doors, once you open them, don't close easy." The Honda's engine caught with that strange, harmonious purr, and Jake could feel it calling to him, promising power beyond imagination. He just hoped he'd live long enough to understand what he'd unleashed. "You're insane if you think that rust bucket can take on Marcus Chen's skyline," Tommy Valdez said, leaning against the garage doorframe. Word had spread fast about Jake's challenge, faster than he'd expected. Now half the underground racing scene wanted to see the nobody mechanic get humiliated. Jake wiped grease from his hands, studying the engine bay. The modification looked almost organic now, its crystalline surfaces catching fluorescent light and throwing it back in patterns that made his eyes water. Maybe I am insane. Chen's been running these streets for 2 years, never lost a race. His car's pushing 500 horses easy. Tommy pulled out his phone, showing Jake a video of the silver skyline tearing through downtown traffic like a missile. Plus, word is he's got backing from some serious people, the kind who don't appreciate outsiders messing with their territory. That gave Jake pause. He'd heard rumors about the underground racing circuit being more than just kids with fast cars and too much time. There were whispers of organized crime, of races that weren't really about racing at all, but about moving money and settling debts. Still, backing down now would mean enduring another 3 years of high school as the kid who talked big and delivered nothing. The Civic's engine ticked as it cooled, metal contracting with tiny pinging sounds that seemed almost musical. Jake had noticed that about the car lately. Everything sounded different, felt different. Even the steering wheel vibrated with a subtle rhythm that matched his heartbeat. "When's the race?" Jake asked. "Tomorrow night. Industrial District, near the old foundry. Midnight." Tommy hesitated. "Jake, man, I've known you since middle school. You're good with engines, real good. But this isn't just about horsepower. Chen's got experience, professional-grade equipment, probably a crew of mechanics who've forgotten more than we know." His phone buzzed. "Unknown number. Heard you're racing Chen tomorrow. Interesting timing." Jake stared at the message, thumb hovering over the keyboard. "Tommy, did you give anyone my number?" "Just Sarah Martinez. She wanted to interview you for the school paper about your—" Tommy stopped mid-sentence, reading over Jake's shoulder. "Who's that from?" Before Jake could respond, another message appeared. "Your little modification has attracted attention, the wrong kind. Be careful what you've awakened." A chill ran down Jake's spine that had nothing to do with the evening air flowing through the open garage. He deleted the messages and pocketed the phone, but the unease lingered. "Probably just someone trying to psych me out," he said, though he didn't believe it himself. Tommy frowned. "Maybe this isn't worth it, man. There's other ways to prove yourself." Jake looked at his car, really looked at it. The modification's crystalline surfaces seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light, almost like a heartbeat. Since installing it, he'd felt more alive than ever before, more connected to something larger than the suffocating routine of school and home and the constant weight of everyone's low expectations. Tommy left an hour later, still shaking his head and muttering about stubborn friends with death wishes. Jake stayed in the garage, fine-tuning the suspension and checking tire pressures, but mostly just thinking. The anonymous messages bothered him more than he'd admitted. How had someone gotten his number? And what did they mean about attracting the wrong kind of attention? As midnight approached, Jake finally headed inside. His father was passed out in his recliner, empty beer cans arranged on the side table like aluminum sentries. The TV flickered with late-night infomercials promising easy wealth and instant success. In his room, Jake lay awake staring at the ceiling, mind racing through gear ratios and power curves. Tomorrow night would change everything, one way or another. Either he'd prove that determination could overcome natural talent and expensive equipment, or he'd become just another cautionary tale about kids who reach too far. Outside his window, a car drove slowly past the house. Its engine note was wrong somehow, too smooth and too quiet, like it was floating rather than rolling on asphalt. Jake closed his eyes and tried to sleep. "You sure about this, kid?" Tony emerged from the shadows, his weathered face creased with concern. The veteran racer had been running these streets for 2 decades, and Jake had never seen him look genuinely worried before. "I need to know if it was a fluke," Jake said, popping the hood to reveal his modified engine. The copper coils gleamed under the harsh fluorescent worklight he'd rigged up, their spiral pattern seeming to pulse with its own rhythm. Tony leaned in closer, squinting at the modification. "What the hell is this thing supposed to do?" Before Jake could answer, the crowd parted as a sleek black Mustang rolled into the circle. The engine's rumble was wrong somehow, too deep, too resonant, like it was coming from somewhere much larger than the car itself. Jake's modification responded immediately, the copper coils beginning to vibrate with a low harmonic hum that made his teeth ache. The Mustang's driver stepped out, and Jake's blood chilled. The woman was tall and pale, with silver hair that moved despite the absence of any wind. Her eyes reflected the headlights like an animal's, and when she smiled, Jake glimpsed teeth that were too sharp. "So you're the boy who's been playing with forces beyond his understanding," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the lot, despite speaking barely above a whisper. "I am Vera Blackthorne. I've come a very long way to see this innovation of yours." The other racers shifted uncomfortably. Even Marcus, who'd shown up with his crew seeking a rematch, seemed suddenly subdued. The temperature in the lot dropped noticeably, forming small clouds of breath vapor in the air. "It's just an engine mod," Jake said, though his voice cracked on the words. The copper coils were humming louder now, and he could feel something building in the air around them, an electric tension that made his skin crawl. Vera laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Just an engine mod. Oh, child, you have no idea what you've stumbled upon, do you? That little contraption is resonating with ley lines that have been dormant for centuries. You've essentially built a tuning fork for the Earth's hidden energies." She gestured to her Mustang, and Jake noticed symbols carved into its black paint, geometric patterns that seemed to shift and writhe when he wasn't looking directly at them. "My vehicle is enhanced as well. Shall we see which approach to bending reality proves superior?" Tony grabbed Jake's arm. "Walk away from this one. I don't know what's happening here, but this isn't about racing anymore." Jake looked around the circle of faces, some curious, others frightened, all of them waiting to see what he would do. Yesterday he'd been nobody, the loser mechanic who got picked on by guys like Marcus. Now something impossible was happening, and for the first time in his life he wasn't running from a challenge. "Quarter mile," he said, meeting Vera's unnatural gaze. "First one to the overpass wins." The crowd fell silent except for the low thrumming coming from both modified engines. Vera's smile widened, showing more of those predatory teeth. "When you lose," she said, approaching until she was close enough that Jake could smell something like ozone and old copper coming from her skin, "I'll be taking your little invention, and then I'll make sure you never tell anyone what you've learned about the spaces between the gears of reality." 2 cars lined up at the improvised starting line. Jake's hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel, watching Danny position himself between the vehicles with a flashlight. The Civic's engine felt different now, not just modified but somehow alive, responding to his emotional state as much as his physical inputs. Vera's Mustang idled beside him with that impossible rumble, and Jake could swear he saw shadows moving inside her car that didn't match the position of the headlights. "You don't have to prove anything," Tony said through the passenger window. "These people, whatever they are, they're not like us." But Jake was beyond backing down now. The modification he'd built in his garage had opened a door he didn't understand, and the only way forward was through whatever waited on the other side. Danny raised the flashlight, his face pale in the reflected light. The 2 engines revved in response, Jake's with its harmonic hum climbing toward an almost musical crescendo, Vera's with a sound like distant thunder. The flashlight dropped, and both cars exploded forward into the darkness. leaving the smell of burned rubber and something else entirely, something that tasted of lightning and old secrets. The morning light filtered through the grimy windows of Santos's garage, casting long shadows across the concrete floor where Jake sat hunched over his laptop. His eyes burned from staring at the screen for hours, scrolling through forums and technical databases, searching for any explanation of what had happened to his engine. The memory of that impossible acceleration, the way reality seemed to bend around his Honda, played on repeat in his mind. "You look like hell, kid." Santos emerged from his office with 2 cups of coffee, steam rising in the cool air. "Been here all night?" Jake accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping his cold fingers around the warm ceramic. "I can't figure it out. The modification I made, it shouldn't work. The fuel injection timing, the compression ratios, everything about it violates basic thermodynamics." Santos pulled up a metal chair, its legs scraping against the floor. Sometimes the best discoveries come from breaking rules nobody thought to question. He gestured toward Jake's Honda, which sat in the corner like a sleeping beast. "Mind showing me what you did?" For the next hour, Jake walked Santos through every detail of his modification. The older mechanic listened intently, occasionally asking technical questions that revealed a deeper understanding of automotive engineering than Jake had expected. When Jake finished explaining the resonance chamber and harmonic frequency adjustments, Santos was quiet for a long moment. "Where did you get the idea for this design?" Santos asked, his voice carrying an odd tension. "I don't know. It just came to me one night while I was working, like something was guiding my hands." Jake paused, remembering the strange dreams that had plagued him for weeks before the breakthrough. "Why? Have you seen something like this before?" Before Santos could answer, the sharp whine of high-performance engines echoed from the street outside. Through the window, Jake saw 3 cars pulling into the lot, a midnight blue Subaru WRX, a cherry-red Mazda RX-7, and leading them, a sleek black Nissan GTR that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Looks like word travels fast," Santos muttered, moving toward the window. "That's Razor's crew." The drivers emerged from their vehicles with predatory confidence. The one from the GTR commanded immediate attention, tall, lean, with silver-streaked hair, despite appearing no older than 30. His pale eyes swept the garage with calculating precision before settling on Jake's Honda. "Marcus Santos," the man called out, his voice carrying clearly across the distance. "I believe you have something that belongs to us." Santos's jaw tightened. "Stay behind me, kid, and whatever you do, don't let them near your car." "What's going on?" Jake whispered. But Santos was already walking toward the garage entrance, his movements careful and deliberate. "Razor," Santos called back. "Been a long time. Thought you'd moved on to easier prey." The silver-haired man, Razor, smiled, and Jake felt his skin crawl. "You know why I'm here, old friend. The boy stumbled onto something he doesn't understand. Something dangerous. He built it himself. Fair and square." "Built it?" Razor laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the confined space. "Look closer, Marcus. Really look. That's not human engineering." Jake's blood ran cold. He glanced back at his Honda, seeing it with fresh eyes. The modification he'd made, the way the components seemed to flow together with impossible elegance, had he really designed all of that? "The resonance frequency he's tapped into," Razor continued, stepping closer, "it's not from this world. Every time he uses it, he makes the barrier a little thinner, and things on the other side are starting to notice." Santos reached into his jacket, and Jake caught a glimpse of something metallic. "The kid doesn't know what he's dealing with. Give us time to explain." "Time we don't have." Razor's companions flanked him, their movements unnaturally synchronized. The last time someone accessed that frequency, it took 3 cities and 27 lives to contain the breach. This ends now before it begins. The air in the garage seemed to thicken, charged with tension that made Jake's teeth ache. His Honda's engine gave a low, answering rumble, though the key was in his pocket and the car was stone cold. "Friday night," Santos said suddenly. "Midnight run on the highway. If the kid can beat your best driver, you leave him alone. He loses. He gives you the engine modification and walks away from racing forever. Razor considered this, his pale eyes never leaving Jake. And if he tries to run before then you'll have to go through me to get him. The smile that spread across Razor's face was sharp enough to cut glass. Done. But Marcus, when this goes bad, and it will go bad, remember that you chose this path. He turned toward his car, then paused. Oh, and boy, you might want to ask your mentor about what really happened in Detroit, about why the best street racer in the Midwest suddenly became a small-town mechanic. The three cars pulled away with a synchronized roar, leaving Jake and Santos alone with the weight of secrets and the countdown to a race that would determine far more than just pink slips and bragging rights. The engine's growl had changed. What started as Marcus's familiar rumble now carried an undertone that made Jake's teeth ache, a frequency that seemed to vibrate through his bones rather than his ears. He gripped the steering wheel tighter as they approached the industrial district where tonight's race would unfold. "You sure about this?" Marcus asked from the passenger seat, his usual cocky demeanor replaced by something Jake had never seen before, genuine concern. Jake wanted to say no. Every instinct screamed that he should turn around, go home, and pretend the modification never happened. But the memory of Tommy Vasquez's sneer burned in his mind, along with the whispered rumors that had followed him through school all week. Freak, faker, dead man racing, I'm sure. He lied. The warehouse district stretched before them like a mechanical graveyard. Abandoned factories loomed against the night sky, their broken windows catching fragments of moonlight. Jake had been here before for smaller races, but tonight felt different. The very air seemed charged with expectation, and not the good kind. They pulled into the staging area where dozens of cars had already gathered. Chrome gleamed under harsh floodlights that someone had jerry-rigged to lampposts. Engines revved in a symphony of mechanical aggression, but Jake noticed something odd. Whenever his engine idled, the others seemed quiet slightly, as if acknowledging something they didn't understand. Well, the garage rat actually showed up. Tommy Vasquez emerged from behind a sleek black Mustang that probably cost more than Jake's house. His crew flanked him, three guys who looked like they bench-pressed motorcycles for fun. But it wasn't Tommy that made Jake's blood run cold. It was the woman standing behind them. She was tall, pale, with silver hair that seemed to move despite the absence of any wind. Her eyes were the color of winter storms, and when she looked at Jake, he felt like she was seeing through his skin to something deeper, something she very much wanted to get her hands on. "You must be the boy with the interesting engine," she said, her voice carrying an accent Jake couldn't place. It was old, though, ancient maybe. "Who's asking?" Jake tried to keep the tremor out of his voice. She smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp. "Someone who appreciates innovation. I'm Vera. I represent certain interests that would very much like to see what you've accomplished." Marcus stepped closer to Jake. "We're just here to race, lady." Vera's laugh was like breaking glass. "Oh, but it's so much more than a race now, isn't it, Jake?" She somehow knew his name, though he was certain they'd never met. "You've stumbled onto something remarkable, something that shouldn't exist in your quaint little reality." The crowd was gathering now, drawn by the tension crackling between them. Jake saw faces he recognized from school, from the garage, from around town, but scattered among them were others, people who didn't quite look right, whose movements were too fluid, whose eyes reflected light like an animal's. "What the hell is she talking about?" Marcus whispered. Jake wished he knew. The modification had been instinct, pure and simple. He'd looked at the engine and somehow known exactly what changes to make, as if the knowledge had been planted in his brain. But now, seeing Vera's hungry expression and the way the strange figures in the crowd watched him, he wondered if that knowledge had come with a price he didn't understand. "The race is simple," Tommy announced, pulling out a tablet to display the route. 3 laps through the district. First one back wins." He paused, shooting a venomous look at Jake, assuming some people can actually keep up. Jake studied the course. It wound through narrow streets between warehouses, around sharp corners that would test both driver skill and mechanical limits. Under normal circumstances, it would be challenging but manageable. These weren't normal circumstances. "What's the wager?" Jake asked, though part of him didn't want to know. Vera stepped forward before Tommy could answer. "If you lose, you give us the engine. Complete access to study your modifications. And if I win, then you'll wish you'd lost." Her smile widened impossibly. "But don't worry, dear boy. That outcome is highly unlikely." The engine's strange harmonics intensified, as if responding to her words. Jake felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool night air. Around them, the crowd was pressing closer, and he noticed that many of them weren't breathing, not blinking, just watching with predatory stillness. "Jake," Marcus grabbed his arm. "We need to leave. Now." But it was too late. Engines were starting up all around them, and Jake realized with growing horror that retreat was no longer an option. Whatever he'd awakened with his modification, it had drawn attention from forces that operated by rules he didn't understand. The only way out was through. He climbed into his car, hands shaking as he gripped the wheel. The engine purred beneath him, ready to reveal secrets that might destroy them all. The warehouse district felt different at 3 in the morning. Marcus crouched behind a rusted shipping container, watching shadows move between the buildings like living things. His modified Civic sat 20 yards away, engine ticking as it cooled, the impossible modification humming with that now familiar otherworldly resonance that made his teeth ache. 3 hours had passed since the race against the silver car. 3 hours since he'd watched something that definitely wasn't human climb out of the wreckage and disappear into the night. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and the growing certainty that he was in way over his head. His phone buzzed. A text from Jake. "Dude, where are you? Everyone's talking about your race. They're saying you vanished into thin air at the finish line." Marcus stared at the message. How could he explain that he hadn't vanished? He'd run. That whatever he'd awakened with his engine modification was drawing things to him that shouldn't exist. He turned the phone off without responding. A scraping sound echoed between the warehouses, metal against concrete, deliberate and rhythmic. Marcus pressed himself deeper into the shadows, heart hammering against his ribs. The sound was coming closer. "We know you're here, boy." The voice carried across the empty lot like smoke, neither fully male nor female. "You cannot hide what you've built. The resonance calls to us." Marcus clenched his jaw. The modification. They could track it somehow, even when the car wasn't running. He glanced at the Civic, calculating the distance. If he could reach it, get the engine started, maybe he could outrun whatever was hunting him. "Your little machine tears holes in reality," the voice continued, closer now. "Do you have any idea what you've done? What's bleeding through because of your meddling?" A figure emerged from between 2 warehouses, and Marcus's blood turned to ice water. It looked human at first glance. Tall, wearing a long coat that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. But its movements were wrong, too fluid, like it was floating just above the ground. And its eyes burned with the same impossible blue-white light he'd seen in his engine bay. "The old knowledge was buried for a reason," the thing said, turning its head with mechanical precision. "Your kind lacks the wisdom to wield such power responsibly." Marcus forced himself to breathe slowly, quietly. His mind raced through everything that had led to this moment, the late nights in his garage, tweaking the engine configuration based on half-remembered dreams and intuitive leaps that made no scientific sense. The way the modification had seemed to build itself, his hands moving with knowledge he didn't consciously possess. 2 more figures materialized from the shadows on his left. They moved with the same unnatural grace, their forms shifting slightly as if seen through heat waves. One raised its hand, and Marcus saw what looked like circuitry running beneath its skin, pulsing with that familiar blue light. "The boy's fear is palpable," this one said, its voice like static electricity. "Perhaps we should simply take what we need and be done with it." "No," The first creature held up a warning hand. The modification is integrated too deeply into his neural patterns. Killing him now would scramble the resonance frequency. We need him intact. Neural patterns? Marcus touched his temple unconsciously. The headaches he'd been having since perfecting the modification, the way he could sense the engine's state without looking at any gauges. Was the modification somehow connected to his brain? A memory surfaced unbidden, his grandfather's workshop, dusty books written in languages he couldn't read, strange diagrams that had seemed like nonsense at the time. The old man muttering about family gifts and bloodlines that remember. Marcus had dismissed it all as senile rambling. Now he wondered if he'd inherited more than just mechanical aptitude. The third creature spoke, its voice like grinding gears. The others come. "We should move now before—" A roar split the night air. Not an engine, something organic and furious. The creatures spun toward the sound, their inhuman composure cracking for the first time. One of them hissed something in a language that made Marcus's ears ring. The Guardians, the first creature snarled. Impossible. They were all destroyed. Apparently not, the second replied, backing toward the shadows. The boy will have to wait. We cannot face them in the open. As quickly as they'd appeared, the creatures melted back into darkness. Marcus stayed frozen behind the container until the only sound was his own ragged breathing and the distant hum of traffic on the highway. When he finally worked up the courage to move, he found deep gouges in the concrete where the creatures had stood, marks that looked suspiciously like claws. Whatever the Guardians were, they'd scared off his hunters. But somehow Marcus doubted his problems were over. He needed answers, and he knew exactly where to find them. His grandfather's workshop held secrets he'd been too young to understand. It was time to go home. The warehouse felt different when Marcus returned the next evening. The air seemed thicker, charged with an energy that made his skin crawl. Shadows lingered in corners where fluorescent lights should have banished them completely, and every sound echoed with an unnatural resonance that set his teeth on edge. Elena was waiting by his workbench, her fingers drumming against the metal surface in a rhythm that reminded him uncomfortably of a heartbeat. "You look terrible," she said without looking up from the engine components scattered before her. "Thanks for the pep talk." Marcus dropped his backpack and surveyed the mess. Someone had been through his tools, his notes, everything. "Let me guess. More visitors while I was gone?" 3 of them this time. They didn't bother with pleasantries. Elena finally met his eyes, and he saw fear there despite her casual tone. "They knew things, Marcus, about the modification, about what happened during your race with Victor. Things nobody should know." Marcus felt ice forming in his stomach. "What kind of things?" "They described the sound your engine made, not just heard it, described it like they'd been inside it, feeling every vibration. And they kept talking about the frequency like it meant something specific." Elena picked up one of his modified spark plugs, turning it over in her hands. "This isn't just about racing anymore, is it?" Before Marcus could answer, the warehouse lights flickered. Once, twice, then settled into an unstable rhythm that cast dancing shadows across the walls. In those shadows, Marcus could swear he saw shapes moving with purpose, circling them like predators sizing up prey. "We need to leave," he said, already reaching for his tools. Too late for that. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, reverberating through the metal walls until it seemed to originate inside their skulls. "The boy has opened a door that cannot be closed." The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Their breath misted as figures materialized from the darkness between the parked cars. Not the suited men from before, these were something else entirely. Their forms flickered like bad television reception, solid one moment and translucent the next, as if they existed partially in some other dimension. Elena grabbed Marcus's arm, her fingernails digging through his jacket. "What did you do?" she whispered. "I don't know," he admitted, backing toward his motorcycle. "I just wanted the engine to run faster." The lead figure stepped forward, and Marcus caught glimpses of its face through the visual static. Angular features that seemed carved from shadow, eyes that reflected light like mirrors. Faster, yes. But speed is merely the surface manifestation. You have accessed something far more fundamental. The resonance frequency, another voice added, this one coming from a figure perched impossibly on the warehouse rafters, the harmonic that bridges dimensions. We have been guardians of that secret for millennia. Marcus's mind raced as pieces clicked together, the strange harmonics his modified engine produced, the way it seemed to pull power from somewhere else, the impossible performance gains that violated every law of physics he knew. I accidentally created some kind of interdimensional tap? Accidentally. The word dripped with contempt from multiple voices, as if ignorance absolves you of responsibility. Your modification tears holes in reality itself. Each time you rev that engine, you weaken the barriers between worlds. Elena stepped protectively in front of Marcus, though her legs visibly shook. Then teach him to fix it instead of threatening him. Laughter echoed through the warehouse. If it could be called laughter, the sound was like breaking glass mixed with screaming wind. Fix it? Child, you understand nothing. The damage spreads with each use. Already, others have sensed the disturbance. Entities that make us seem benevolent by comparison. As if summoned by those words, a new sound filled the air, a low, thrumming pulse that seemed to emanate from the concrete floor itself. The parked cars began to vibrate, their alarms shrieking in discordant harmony. Cracks spiderwebbed across the warehouse windows. "They come," the first figure said, and for the first time, Marcus detected genuine fear in its voice. "You have attracted the attention of the Void Runners. Even we cannot protect you from them." "Then help us understand," Marcus shouted over the growing cacophony. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." The figure studied him for a long moment, its form stabilizing slightly. "Perhaps. There is one way to contain the damage, but it requires sacrifice. You must face the Void Runners in their own realm, a race where the stakes are not mere speed, but the very fabric of existence." The thrumming intensified, and hairline cracks began appearing in the air itself, revealing glimpses of something vast and hungry beyond. Through those tears, Marcus saw vehicles that defied description, machines built from crystallized darkness and impossible geometries, driven by entities that existed as pure malevolent intent. "Choose quickly," the figure urged, as reality continued to fracture around them. "Race for the right to close what you have opened, or watch your world become their feeding ground." Marcus looked at Elena, at the spreading cracks in existence, at his modified motorcycle that had started this nightmare. The choice, terrifying as it was, seemed obvious. When do we race? The warehouse district looked different in daylight, less menacing, more abandoned. Jake pulled his Honda into the shadows between two rusted shipping containers, the engine's familiar purr doing nothing to calm his nerves. 3 days had passed since the cemetery, 3 days of sleepless nights and constant looking over his shoulder. Marcus emerged from behind a concrete pillar, his usual confident swagger replaced by cautious steps. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his expensive jacket was wrinkled like he'd slept in it. "You look like hell," Jake called out, climbing from his car. "Says the kid who's been hiding in his garage." Marcus approached, glancing around the empty lot. "We need to talk about what happened, what those things were." "I've been thinking about that." Jake popped his hood, revealing the crystalline formation that had grown more complex overnight. New patterns spiraled through the metal, pulsing with that same otherworldly energy. "I think my modification didn't just change how the engine works. I think it opened something." Marcus leaned closer, his reflection fracturing in the crystal's surface. "Like a door? More like a beacon." Jake traced one of the glowing veins with his finger, feeling warmth that had nothing to do with engine heat. "Remember what that thing said? About awakening them? I think there are more of those shadow creatures, and my engine is calling to them." A low rumble echoed across the empty lot. Both boys froze, scanning the horizon for approaching vehicles. Instead, The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. A deep, resonant hum that made their teeth ache. "That's not a car," Marcus whispered. The air above them began to shimmer, like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. But the temperature was dropping, their breath forming small clouds as reality bent around them. Jake slammed his hood shut just as the first shadow materialized. This one was different from the cemetery creatures, larger, more solid, with edges that seemed to cut through the fabric of space itself. Its voice was the grinding of metal on stone. The key must be returned. "Key?" Jake backed toward his car, Marcus beside him. "What key?" "You carry it, Fleshborn. The modification that bridges our realm and yours." The shadow thing moved closer, its form shifting between states of matter. It was sealed for good reason. More shadows began emerging from the shimmering air. 5, 10, a dozen writhing forms that made Jake's eyes water to look at directly. They moved with purpose, surrounding the boys in a tightening circle. "The garage," Marcus hissed. "Your dad's tools. Iron stops them, right? That's folklore. These aren't vampires." But even as Jake spoke, he remembered the way the creatures had recoiled from the cemetery's wrought iron fence. "Actually, maybe you're onto something." He yanked open his car door, engine roaring to life with an otherworldly shriek that made the shadows writhe. The crystalline modification blazed like a star, casting geometric patterns of light that seemed to physically push against the darkness. "Get in!" Marcus dove through the passenger door as Jake floored the accelerator. The Honda shot forward, its impossible engine propelling them through the circle of shadows at speeds that shouldn't have been possible in such a short distance. The creatures lunged, their forms stretching like living smoke, but the car's blazing energy field held them back. They burst onto the main road, tires screaming against asphalt. In the rearview mirror, Jake watched the shadows dissolve back into the shimmer, but he knew they weren't gone, just waiting. "This is insane," Marcus gasped, gripping the dashboard. "Those things, they're not from here, are they?" "Definitely not from around here." Jake took a hard right, heading for the industrial district where his father's shop waited. "I think when I modified the engine, I accidentally tapped into something else. Another dimension, maybe, or some kind of parallel space where those creatures exist. And now they want it back. Or they want to stop it from spreading." Jake's mind raced as fast as his engine. Think about it. If one teenager in a garage can accidentally punch a hole between worlds, what happens when that technology gets out? When every street racer and mechanic starts copying the modification, the implications hit them both at the same time. This wasn't just about Jake anymore, or proving himself to bullies, or winning races. This was about preventing an invasion from something humanity wasn't ready to face. They pulled into the shop's parking lot, the familiar sight of his father's garage providing little comfort. Through the windows, Jake could see his dad bent over another engine, oblivious to the supernatural war brewing around his son. "We need help," Marcus said quietly. "Real help. Someone who understands this stuff." Jake nodded, watching the crystal patterns pulse beneath his hood. The modification was evolving, growing stronger, and he had the terrifying suspicion that the shadows weren't the only things it would eventually attract. Somewhere in the distance, that otherworldly humming began again, closer this time. The engine's rhythm had changed. Marcus felt it in his bones as he guided his car through the empty industrial district, the modification humming with an energy that seemed almost alive. 3 days had passed since the warehouse race, 3 days of sleepless nights and constant vigilance. The shadows had grown longer, and he swore he could see things moving in his peripheral vision that vanished when he turned to look. His phone buzzed against the dashboard. Another message from an unknown number, the 5th today. "We know what you've done. Stop now, before it's too late." Marcus deleted it without reading the full text, just like the others. Whoever was behind these threats clearly didn't understand that turning back wasn't an option anymore. The modification had become part of him, integrated so deeply into his understanding of mechanics that removing it would be like cutting out his own heart. The garage came into view, and Marcus felt his chest tighten. Every window was dark except for one, his workshop. A faint blue glow pulsed from within, the same ethereal light he'd first seen during that desperate night when everything changed. But he'd left hours ago, and the power should have been off. He parked across the street, engine idling as he studied the building. The glow intensified, then dimmed, like something breathing. His phone rang, making him jump. The caller ID showed his father's number. "Dad?" "Marcus, thank God. Where are you?" His father's voice carried an edge of panic that Marcus had never heard before. "Near the garage." "What's wrong?" "Don't go in there. Listen to me very carefully. People came to the house looking for you. Strange people asking strange questions about your car. Your mother and I are at your aunt's place. We need to talk." The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone, his father's words echoing in his mind. The blue glow in his workshop window pulsed brighter, almost beckoning. Against every instinct screaming at him to drive away, Marcus turned off the engine and stepped into the night. The front door hung open, swaying slightly in the breeze. Marcus had locked it when he left. He was certain of it. He pulled his phone's flashlight and crept forward, each step feeling like a betrayal of common sense. The blue glow grew stronger as he approached his workshop, accompanied by a low humming that resonated in his chest. Inside, 3 figures stood around his workbench. They wore dark suits that seemed to absorb light, and when they turned to face him, their eyes reflected the blue radiance like mirrors. The tallest one smiled, revealing teeth that gleamed too white in the unnatural illumination. "Marcus Chen," the figure said, its voice carrying harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't produce. "The boy who opened doors that should have remained sealed." "Who are you?" Marcus managed, his hand gripping the doorframe for support. "We are the custodians," the figure replied, "guardians of the barriers between what is and what should not be. Your modification has torn a hole in the fabric of possibility itself." The workshop's equipment had been rearranged into a complex pattern around the workbench. His tools, spare parts, and various engine components formed geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly. At the center sat a device Marcus didn't recognize, a crystalline structure that pulsed with the same energy signature as his modification. "You don't understand what you've accomplished," another custodian said, this one shorter but somehow more intimidating. "The principles you've stumbled upon were abandoned eons ago for good reason. They opened pathways to realms where the laws of physics serve different masters." Marcus felt the modification in his car responding to the device on his workbench, the connection between them humming with increasing intensity. "I just wanted to build something that worked. I didn't mean—" "Intent is irrelevant," the tall custodian interrupted. "Effect is everything. Your races have created resonance patterns that weaken the barriers further. Each time you engage that modification at high speeds, you invite chaos into an ordered universe." The crystalline device began to spin, and Marcus felt something fundamental shift around him. The air itself seemed thicker, charged with potential energy that made his skin tingle. Through the workshop window, he could see his car's headlights flickering in response. "We offer you a choice," the third custodian spoke for the first time, its voice like grinding metal. "Surrender the modification willingly, and we will repair the damage. Refuse, and we will take it by force, along with everyone who has been exposed to its influence." Marcus thought of Zara, of his parents, of everyone at the races who had witnessed what his car could do. The custodian's threat wasn't just aimed at him anymore. His pursuit of respect and recognition had put innocent people in danger. But as he watched the device spin faster, Marcus realized something the custodians hadn't anticipated. The modification wasn't just installed in his car, it had changed him too. He could feel the same energy patterns flowing through his nervous system, connecting him to something vast and incomprehensible. "I need time to think," he said, backing toward the door. The tall custodian's smile widened impossibly. "Time is the one resource we cannot afford to waste." The abandoned warehouse stood like a monument to decay on the industrial side of town, its broken windows catching fragments of moonlight. Jake's hands trembled as he guided his car through the maze of rusted shipping containers and abandoned machinery that surrounded the building. The engine hummed with that otherworldly resonance that had become both his greatest asset and his deepest fear. Marcus sat rigid in the passenger seat, his usual cockiness replaced by something Jake had never seen before, genuine terror. "You sure about this place?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's where everything started," Jake replied, remembering the night 6 weeks ago when he'd first discovered the impossible modification. He'd been here scavenging for parts, desperate to prove himself, when he'd stumbled upon the strange crystalline fragments buried beneath decades of industrial waste. "Whatever's hunting us, whatever I unleashed, it began here." The car's headlights swept across the warehouse entrance, revealing fresh tire tracks in the dust. Someone else was already here. Jake's stomach clenched as he recognized the distinctive tread pattern, the same marks he'd seen at every race, every place the shadow figures had appeared. "We're not alone," Marcus observed, his hand instinctively reaching for the door handle. Jake killed the engine, and the sudden silence felt oppressive. The modification's energy seemed to pulse beneath the hood, creating ripples in the air that made his vision blur. He could feel something responding from deep within the warehouse, an answering call that made his teeth ache. They approached the building on foot, staying low between the scattered debris. Jake's modified flashlight, enhanced with fragments of the same crystalline material in his engine, cast an eerie blue glow that revealed more than normal light should. Through the beam, he could see energy signatures, traces of the supernatural forces that had been stalking him. The warehouse door hung open, creaking in a wind that Jake couldn't feel. Inside, the vast space echoed with their footsteps, despite their attempts at stealth. Ancient machinery loomed in the darkness, and Jake realized this hadn't always been an abandoned building. The equipment was too specialized, too advanced for any normal industrial operation. "What is this place?" Marcus whispered, running his hand along a console covered in symbols that seemed to shift and writhe in the blue light. Before Jake could answer, a familiar voice emerged from the shadows. "It's where they tried to bridge our worlds." Dr. Elena Vasquez stepped into their light, but something was wrong. Her eyes held the same otherworldly gleam Jake had seen in the shadow races, and her movements carried an unnatural fluidity. Behind her, 3 figures materialized from the darkness, the drivers Jake had faced in recent races, their faces now clearly visible and entirely too human. "You led us quite a chase, young mechanic," Dr. Vasquez continued, her voice carrying harmonics that made Jake's bones vibrate. "But you always were going to end up here. The fragments call to their source." Jake's hand moved instinctively to his pocket, where he kept the spare crystal he'd been studying. The moment his fingers touched it, every piece of modified equipment in the warehouse blazed to life. Screens flickered with data streams, generators hummed with impossible energy, and the very air began to thrum with power. 30 years ago, this was a research facility, Dr. Vasquez explained, her form beginning to shimmer and shift. "We thought we were developing advanced propulsion systems. Instead, we opened a door that should have remained closed forever." The warehouse filled with the sound of racing engines, though Jake could see no cars. The shadow racers began to circle them, their movements leaving trails of energy in the air. Marcus grabbed Jake's arm, his grip tight with panic. "The modification you discovered," Dr. Vasquez continued, "it's not just an engine enhancement, it's a key. Every time you race, every time you push the limits of what's possible, you weaken the barriers between dimensions. And we've been waiting so very long to fully cross over." Jake understood now why the bully's taunts had stung so much, why he'd been so desperate to prove himself. The fragments hadn't just enhanced his engine, they'd been influencing him, driving him toward this moment. His need for recognition, his willingness to take increasingly dangerous risks, none of it had been entirely his own choice. But understanding didn't mean surrender. Jake pulled the crystal from his pocket and held it high. The blue light intensified, and he felt the modification in his car responding from outside. If these beings needed the crystalline technology to cross dimensions, then perhaps he could use it to send them back. "You made one mistake," Jake said, his voice carrying more confidence than he felt. "You assumed I didn't understand what I was building." The crystal in his hand began to pulse in sync with his heartbeat, and Jake smiled grimly. Time to see if 6 weeks of desperate experimentation had taught him enough to survive what came next. The warehouse erupted in blinding light as the real race began. The garage felt like a tomb in the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus sat cross-legged beside the Mustang's exposed engine, his trembling fingers tracing the impossible modifications he'd made weeks ago. The metal hummed with an otherworldly energy that made his teeth ache, and thin veins of silver light pulsed through the engine block like a mechanical heartbeat. "I should have listened," he whispered to the empty space. Jake's warning echoed in his mind. Some doors shouldn't be opened. But it was too late for regrets. The thing he'd awakened was spreading, growing stronger with each race, each impossible burst of speed that defied every law of physics he'd ever learned. His phone buzzed against the concrete floor. Another message from an unknown number tonight. Pier 47. "Come alone or everyone you care about burns." Marcus closed his eyes, remembering the sound of Chen's screams as his Honda had crumpled like paper against the invisible force field. The other driver, if it even was a driver, had emerged from the wreckage unscathed, its eyes burning with the same silver light that now infected his engine. It had smiled at Marcus with too many teeth before vanishing into smoke. "You've been busy." Marcus spun around, his heart hammering. A figure stepped from the shadows near the garage door, tall, angular, wearing a coat that seemed to absorb light. The stranger's face was sharp and pale, with eyes like chips of obsidian. "Who are you?" Marcus scrambled to his feet, reaching for the wrench on his workbench. "Someone who's been cleaning up messes like yours for a very long time." The stranger moved closer, each step perfectly silent. "Do you have any idea what you've done? What you've invited into this world?" "I just modified an engine. I made it faster." "You tore a hole between dimensions." The stranger's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "That modification of yours is a beacon, calling things from the spaces between spaces. Ancient things, hungry things." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "That's impossible. It's just quantum mechanics, some kind of zero-point energy field." "Physics?" The stranger laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Boy, you've stumbled onto something that predates your entire species. Those symbols you etched into the metal, you thought you invented them?" The silver veins in the engine pulsed brighter, responding to the stranger's presence. Marcus backed away as the temperature in the garage dropped 10 degrees in as many seconds. "They've been carved into stone circles, painted in blood on cave walls, whispered by madmen in asylums for thousands of years. And you, in your infinite teenage wisdom, decided to engrave them into an internal combustion engine. I can fix it." Marcus's voice cracked. "I can reverse the process, shut it down." "Can you?" The stranger gestured toward the Mustang. The engine was glowing now, casting writhing shadows on the walls. "Look at it, Marcus. Really look." Against his better judgment, Marcus turned toward his car. The sight hit him like a physical blow. The engine block was changing, organic tendrils of metal spreading outward like infection. The pistons moved without fuel, without spark, driven by something that had never known the inside of a combustion chamber. "It's alive," he breathed. "Getting there. And when it fully awakens, when it calls its siblings through the cracks you've opened, this world will become very interesting, in all the worst ways." Marcus's phone buzzed again. The same message, but this time accompanied by a photo, his sister walking out of the library, unaware of the shadow with silver eyes, following 3 steps behind. "They have Sarah." His hands shook as he stared at the screen. "Of course they do. They need you at the pier tonight, need you to race again. Every time you use that engine, Every impossible turn and physics-defying acceleration, the door opens wider. Then I won't go. I'll destroy the car, melt it down, and your sister dies, along with anyone else they can use as leverage. The stranger's expression softened slightly. But there might be another way. Marcus looked up, desperate hope flickering in his chest. What? You opened the door, but doors swing both ways. If you're willing to risk everything, your life, your sanity, possibly your soul, you might be able to close it. From the other side, what does that mean? The stranger reached into his coat and withdrew something that hurt to look at directly. A key made of crystallized darkness, edges that seemed to cut through reality itself. It means one last race, Marcus, but not against them. The stranger's smile was razor-thin. With them, into the spaces between spaces, where the real architects of this nightmare are waiting. The garage fell silent except for the increasingly organic sounds coming from under the Mustang's hood. Marcus stared at the impossible key, knowing that taking it would change everything, that there would be no going back. Outside, the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, and somewhere across town, his sister was walking into a trap meant for him. The underground parking garage beneath the Meridian Tower stretched into shadow-filled infinity, concrete pillars creating a maze of hiding spots and blind corners. Jake's modified Civic sat in the center like a glowing beacon, its engine humming with that otherworldly resonance that had started everything. The sound echoed off the walls, creating harmonics that made his teeth ache. "They're coming," Maya whispered from the passenger seat, her fingers white-knuckled around the tablet, displaying energy readings that shouldn't exist. 3 vehicles, maybe 4. The signatures are wrong. Jake nodded, watching the entrance ramp through his mirrors. He'd chosen this location carefully. Multiple exit routes, enough space to maneuver, and most importantly, far enough underground that whatever happened wouldn't spill onto the streets above. Too many innocent people had already gotten hurt. The first vehicle emerged from the ramp darkness like something birthed from a nightmare. What had once been a Lamborghini now pulsed with veins of dark energy running across its surface, the metal itself seeming to breathe. Behind it came 2 more cars, their forms shifting and unstable, as if reality couldn't quite decide what they were supposed to be. The collective's gotten stronger, Maya observed, her scientific mind cataloging horrors that defied every law of physics she'd ever learned. They're not just possessing the vehicles anymore, they're rewriting their molecular structure. Jake's hand found the gear shifter. The modification he'd stumbled upon in his uncle's garage felt different now, heavier somehow, as if it carried the weight of dimensions pressing against each other. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a nobody mechanic getting shoved into lockers. Now he was the only thing standing between his world and something that viewed reality as a suggestion. The lead vehicle's headlights blazed with purple fire as it began circling Jake's position. The others spread out, moving with predatory patience. Jake had expected this, a coordinated hunt rather than a straight race. The collective had learned from their previous encounters. "Remember," Jake said, more to himself than to Maya, "they want the engine intact. They won't risk destroying it unless they have no choice." That's supposed to be comforting? The first attack came without warning. The transformed Lamborghini launched itself forward, not driving but flowing across the concrete like liquid metal. Jake slammed the Civic into reverse, feeling the modifications surge to life. The world around them shifted, physics bending as his car achieved impossible acceleration. They shot backward between 2 pillars just as the Lamborghini struck where they'd been, its impact leaving a crater in the reinforced concrete. Jake spun the wheel, executing a handbrake turn that defied momentum, and suddenly they were facing their attackers again. The second vehicle, something that might have been a motorcycle but now resembled a mechanical spider, skittered up a pillar and launched itself at them from above. The Civic's engine screamed, that dimensional resonance building to a crescendo that made the air itself vibrate. Jake shifted into third, then fourth, accelerating straight up one of the garage's slanted support beams. For a moment they drove on the ceiling, gravity forgotten, before dropping back down behind their pursuers. How is this possible? Maya gasped, pressed back in her seat by forces that shouldn't exist. I don't think it is, Jake admitted, wrestling with the wheel as they landed. I think we're cheating. The spider cycle twisted in mid-air, landing badly but recovering with inhuman grace. Its rider was a shadow wearing the rough shape of a person, features shifting like smoke. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Give us the catalyst, meat thing. Your dimension bleeds into ours every moment you use it. Soon the barriers will be too weak to maintain. Jake's response was to shift into fifth gear and ram straight into the creature. The impact sent shockwaves through both vehicles, but where the motorcycle crumpled and sparked, Jake's Civic emerged unscathed, protected by the same forces that let it defy physics. The remaining vehicles converged from three directions. Jake found himself playing a deadly game of chicken with things that didn't understand the concept of self-preservation. He wove between them, his car bending space and time with each gear change, but he could feel the strain building. The modification wasn't meant for extended use. Each impossible maneuver drew more energy from whatever dimensional reservoir powered it. Maya's tablet began screaming warnings. Jake, the energy readings are off the charts. If this continues... Her words were cut off as the transformed Lamborghini appeared directly in front of them, having somehow folded space to cross the garage instantly. There was no time to brake, no room to swerve. Jake did the only thing he could think of. He shifted into sixth gear. The world exploded into fractured reality as the Civic punched through dimensional barriers like tissue paper. For one terrifying moment, Jake caught a glimpse of the space between spaces, an endless void filled with hungry things that turned their attention toward the brief opening his passage had created. Then they were through, emerging in the garage's upper level with their pursuers nowhere to be seen. But Jake knew this was far from over. If anything, he'd just made everything worse. The abandoned warehouse smelled of rust and motor oil, its broken skylights casting jagged patterns of moonlight across the concrete floor. Jake crouched beside the Mustang, his hands trembling as he made the final adjustments to the engine. Every bolt, every wire connection had to be perfect. One mistake and the modification would tear itself apart, taking him with it. "You sure about this, Jake?" Marcus whispered from the shadows near the entrance, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the loading dock. "Those things, they're not like the others we've faced." Jake didn't look up from the engine bay. He couldn't afford the distraction. The Void Runners had found them 3 times in the past week, each encounter more violent than the last. Whatever controlled those twisted machines was learning, adapting, becoming more aggressive. The black ichor that leaked from their engines had started appearing in his dreams, calling to him in whispers that made his teeth ache. "The frequency harmonics should disrupt their neural link," Jake muttered, securing the final resonance chamber. "At least, that's the theory." "Theory," Marcus repeated flatly. "Great, we're betting our lives on theory." A distant rumble echoed through the industrial district, the sound of engines that didn't belong to any earthly vehicle. Jake's modification pulsed in response, the crystalline components suddenly glowing with that familiar blue-white light. But something was different this time. The glow flickered, unstable, as if the energy was fighting against itself. "They're coming," Jake said, slamming the hood. "How many?" Marcus pressed against the window, peering through the grime. "Can't tell. Maybe 6. No, 8. Shit, Jake, there's more arriving every minute." The warehouse began to vibrate as the Void Runners approached, their impossible engines creating a resonance that made the very air hum with malevolent energy. Jake had faced them before, but never this many, never when they seemed so coordinated. He slid behind the wheel, the familiar weight of the steering wheel steadying his nerves. The Mustang's engine rumbled to life, but the sound was wrong, higher-pitched, almost musical. The modification was working differently tonight, pulling energy from somewhere deeper, somewhere that made Jake's skin crawl. "Get in," he ordered Marcus. "We're not running anymore." "What do you mean we're not?" The loading dock exploded inward as the first Void Runner smashed through, its twisted chassis crackling with dark electricity. Behind it came another, then 3 more, their headlights casting sickly green shadows across the warehouse floor. Jake could see the pilots now, or what had once been pilots. Their faces were wrong, features stretched and distorted as if viewed through water. Jake floored the accelerator, the Mustang leaping forward with a scream of tortured metal. But instead of fleeing, he aimed straight for the largest Void Runner, the one whose engine sang with harmonics that made his bones vibrate. The collision should have killed them both. Instead, Jake's modification flared with blinding intensity, and he felt the Mustang phase through the enemy vehicle like a ghost. For one terrifying moment, he could see into the other dimension, a realm of twisted metal and writhing shadows where the laws of physics bent like heated wire. Then they were through, spinning out on the far side of the warehouse as the Void Runner exploded in a shower of sparks and that same black ichor. But Jake barely had time to recover before two more were flanking him, their weapons, cruel spikes of crystallized darkness extending from their chassis. "Jake!" Marcus screamed, pointing to the right. Another Void Runner was materializing from thin air, its form solidifying as it dropped from some impossible height. Jake wrenched the wheel hard left, feeling the Mustang's tires lose grip as the modification overcharged, pulling energy from the quantum foam itself. The warehouse dissolved around them. For a moment that lasted forever, Jake found himself racing through a tunnel of pure light, the Mustang's engine screaming in harmonics that no human throat could produce. He could see the source now, the thing that had been sleeping in the spaces between atoms, the entity his modification had awakened. It was vast, ancient, and utterly alien, and it was angry. The warehouse snapped back into focus as they crashed through the far wall, concrete and rebar exploding around them. Jake fought to control the vehicle as they skidded across the parking lot, the remaining Void Runners in pursuit. But something had changed. The enemy vehicles were moving erratically, their formation broken. Jake's modification pulsed once more, and he felt the connection, brief but unmistakable. For just an instant, he could sense the hive mind that controlled the Void Runners, could feel its confusion as the quantum disruption severed its hold over its servants. Three of the pursuing vehicles simply stopped, their pilots slumping forward as whatever force animated them withdrew. But the others kept coming, and Jake realized with growing dread that some of them were no longer under external control. Some of them had developed minds of their own. The warehouse erupted into chaos as Marcus slammed the interceptor into reverse, tires screaming against concrete as supernatural engines roared to life around them. The shadows had found them, and this time they'd brought everything. "How many?" Riley shouted over the cacophony, her fingers flying across her tablet as she tried to maintain the connection to the quantum resonance chamber they jury-rigged in the corner. "Too many." Marcus yanked the wheel hard left as a sleek black machine materialized from thin air, its impossible geometry making his eyes water. The thing that had once been called a car bore no resemblance to anything from this reality. It moved like liquid mercury given form and purpose. Dr. Chen's voice crackled through the radio. "The chamber needs 30 more seconds to reach full resonance. Whatever you do, don't let them near the equipment." Marcus floored the accelerator, feeling the modified engine respond with that familiar otherworldly hum. The quantum tunneling effect kicked in, and suddenly the interceptor was moving through space differently, existing in multiple positions simultaneously. It was the only thing that had kept them alive this long. A shadow rider materialized beside them, its face a swirling void beneath a racing helmet that seemed to bend light around its edges. Marcus could feel the cold radiating from the thing even through the car's protective barriers. The rider's mount, calling it a motorcycle, was generous, resembled more of a living nightmare that happened to have wheels. "Left side," Riley warned, and Marcus saw her raising the improvised quantum disruptor they'd built from salvaged parts. The weapon fired with a sound like reality tearing, and the Shadow Rider flickered out of existence with a shriek that made their teeth ache. But 3 more took its place. The warehouse walls began to shift and warp as more shadows poured through dimensional rifts. Marcus realized with growing horror that they weren't just dealing with riders anymore. The entire building was being invaded by something that existed outside normal space-time. The resonance chamber. Dr. Chen's voice turned urgent. They're interfering with the quantum field. Through the windshield, Marcus could see their carefully constructed equipment beginning to spark and smoke as shadow creatures swarmed over it. All their work, all their hope of finding a way to reverse what his engine modifications had unleashed, was about to be destroyed. "I have to get closer," he said, spinning the wheel toward the equipment. "That's suicide!" Riley grabbed his arm. "There are dozens of them." "We die trying." Marcus's jaw set with grim determination. "I started this mess. I'm not letting it end with those things winning." He gunned the engine, feeling the quantum effect surge through every molecule of the car. The interceptor began to phase in and out of visible reality, existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. It was disorienting and nauseating, but it was also their only chance. Shadow Riders converged from all directions, their impossible vehicles defying every law of physics as they moved through solid walls and twisted space around themselves. Marcus wove between them, the Interceptor's modified engine allowing him to slip through gaps that shouldn't have existed. A massive shadow construct, something that might have once been a semi-truck before being twisted by interdimensional forces, materialized directly in their path. Marcus didn't hesitate. He triggered the quantum tunnel effect and drove straight through it, feeling the Interceptor's molecular structure scatter and reform on the other side. They reached the resonance chamber just as the last of the protective barriers failed. Dr. Chen was there, frantically working to stabilize the quantum field while shadow creatures pressed closer, their very presence causing reality to blur at the edges. "Now!" Marcus shouted to Riley. "Hit everything with the disruptor." He didn't hesitate. The weapon discharged with maximum power, creating an expanding sphere of quantum disruption that sent the shadow creatures reeling. For a moment, the space around the chamber cleared. Dr. Chen's hands flew over the controls. Resonance achieved. The field is stabilizing. But their victory was short-lived. The largest shadow construct Marcus had ever seen began materializing in the center of the warehouse, something vast and impossible that made the air itself scream as it forced its way into their reality. "That's not possible," Riley whispered, staring at readings on her tablet that made no sense. "The quantum signature, it's off the charts." The thing that was emerging defied description. It existed in too many dimensions at once, its form shifting between states that human eyes couldn't properly process. Marcus felt his sanity strain just looking at it. And somehow, impossibly, he recognized it. It was the source, the thing his engine modifications had been drawing power from all along, the entity that existed in the spaces between realities, feeding on the boundaries between dimensions. It had been using him, using his modifications to gradually weaken the barriers that kept it imprisoned. Every race, every time he'd triggered the quantum effect, he'd been helping it claw its way into their world. Now it was almost free. The warehouse trembled as Marcus gunned the engine, his modified Civic screaming defiance against the impossible geometry that twisted around them. Reality buckled and warped like heated metal, walls stretching into impossible angles while shadows moved with predatory intent. "The breach is widening," Elena shouted over the dimensional static crackling through her equipment. "Whatever's coming through, it's big." Through the writhing portal, Marcus caught glimpses of the other side, a realm where physics bent to alien will and nightmares took mechanical form. The shadow car had been just a scout. Now something vast and hungry pressed against the dimensional membrane, its presence making the air itself scream. "How do we close it?" Marcus yanked the wheel hard left as a tendril of living darkness lashed out, missing his windshield by inches. "The resonance frequency." Dr. Chen's voice crackled through the radio. "Your engine's quantum signature created the tear. It might be able to seal it." Marcus felt the engine's pulse through his bones, that impossible rhythm he'd discovered by accident in his father's garage. The modification that everyone called stupid had torn a hole between worlds. Now he had to trust that same impossible science could save them. Behind them, Jake's Mustang roared as he drifted around a support beam, his street racing skills finally put to use against something that mattered. Whatever you're gonna do it fast. This place is coming apart. The portal writhed, expanding like a wound in space itself. Through it, Marcus saw the true enemy, not just the entities that had been hunting him, but the realm they came from. A place where the laws of physics were suggestions, where will and intent shaped reality. His modification had somehow bridged that gap, giving him access to power that shouldn't exist in their world. But power always came with a price. Marcus. Elena's warning came just as another shadow car materialized from the portal, this one twice the size of the first. Its engine didn't roar, it whispered promises of extinction, and where its wheels touched the ground, concrete turned to glass. Marcus floored the accelerator, feeling his modification sync with something deeper than physics. The engine sang that impossible note, the one that made reality hiccup. But this time, instead of using it to bend the laws of motion, he tried to understand what he'd really created. The quantum calculations scrolled through his mind, like Elena's equations made manifest. His father's wrench, heavy in his pocket, seemed to pulse in rhythm with the engine. The old man had known something, had left clues in every lesson about respecting the machine, understanding the harmony between parts. It's not just an engine modification, Marcus realized, his voice barely audible over the chaos. It's a tuning fork. He spun the wheel, using his enhanced acceleration to climb the warehouse wall, an impossible maneuver that sent Jake cursing in amazement. The modification wasn't breaking physics, it was playing the underlying frequency that held their reality together, and he'd been playing it wrong. The massive shadow car launched itself upward, defying gravity with casual malevolence. But Marcus was already 3 moves ahead, his mind calculating angles that shouldn't exist. He hit the peak of his wall ride and launched into open air, the engine's note shifting from chaotic to controlled. Elena's equipment screamed as harmonic frequencies aligned. "Marcus, what are you doing? The readings are—" "Fixing my mistake," he said, and shifted into the impossible gear. This time, instead of pushing against reality's limits, he found its natural rhythm. The modification had always been about harmony, not force. His father's lessons echoed in his memory. Respect the machine, understand the balance, never fight what you should flow with. The engine's song changed from discord to symphony. Reality snapped back like a rubber band, the portal's edges beginning to contract. The massive shadow car found itself suddenly subject to proper physics again and discovered that defying gravity only worked when the rules allowed it. The entity crashed into the warehouse floor with the sound of breaking nightmares. Marcus landed beside it, his Civic's tires smoking but intact. The portal continued shrinking, the other dimensional intruders being pulled back to their realm like water down a drain. "The frequency's stabilizing," Elena reported, wonder in her voice. "The breach is sealing itself." But the massive shadow car wasn't finished. Its driver emerged, not the faceless shadow Marcus expected, but something wearing his own face, his own sneer of desperate ambition, a version of himself that had chosen power over understanding, force over finesse. "You think closing the door will stop us?" his doppelganger hissed. "You opened it once, you'll open it again. The hunger always wins." The portal contracted to human size, then smaller. The shadow Marcus began to fade as his realm receded. "Maybe," Marcus admitted, watching his dark reflection dissolve. "But not today." The portal snapped shut with a sound like reality sighing in relief. The wreckage of Marcus's car still smoldered in the distance as Jake limped through the abandoned warehouse district, his modified Honda's engine ticking as it cooled. His hands trembled against the steering wheel, not from fear, but from the residual energy coursing through his veins. The impossible had happened again. His engine modification had somehow absorbed the supernatural force that had been hunting him, but at what cost? The dashboard flickered with readings that shouldn't exist. Temperature gauges showed impossible negatives. The tachometer spun wildly despite the engine being off. and a strange blue phosphorescence leaked from beneath the hood. Whatever he'd unleashed 3 weeks ago when he first tested his stupid modification had evolved beyond his understanding. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from Riley, "Safe house compromised. They found us. Meet at the old Riverside track. Come alone." He cursed under his breath. The supernatural entities that wanted his secret buried had been relentless, escalating from mysterious accidents to outright assassination attempts. Marcus had been the latest in a line of possessed racers, their eyes glowing with that same otherworldly light, their cars defying the laws of physics in ways that made Jake's modification look like a parlor trick. The drive to Riverside took him through the heart of the city, where normal people lived normal lives, blissfully unaware that reality was tearing at the seams. Street lights flickered as he passed, and he noticed other cars giving his Honda an unusually wide berth. Animals fled. Even the pigeons seemed to sense something wrong. At the abandoned racetrack, Riley's silhouette waited by the rusted grandstands. But something felt off. Her posture was too rigid, too perfect. As Jake approached, keeping his engine running, he saw her eyes reflecting the moonlight with an unnatural sheen. "You've led us quite a chase, Jake Chen." Riley's voice carried harmonics that made his teeth ache. "Did you really think a 17-year-old grease monkey could outsmart forces that predate your civilization?" Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. "Where's the real Riley?" "Safe, for now. Unlike you." The thing wearing Riley's face smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp. "Your modification wasn't a discovery, boy. It was a key. And you've unlocked something that was imprisoned for good reason." The air around the track began to shimmer, and Jake realized they weren't alone. Dozens of cars emerged from the shadows. Classic muscle cars, sleek imports, even some vehicles he couldn't identify, their designs seeming to bend space around them. Each driver's eyes glowed with that same supernatural light. "One final race," Not Riley continued. "You win and we withdraw. We find another way to reseal what you've opened. But when you lose, and you will lose, you'll join our ranks, and your modification dies with your humanity." Jake revved his engine, and the supernatural energy within it responded like a caged animal. "And if I refuse? Then everyone you've ever cared about dies tonight, starting with the real Riley." The track lights blazed to life, powered by some impossible energy source. Jake counted at least 30 supernatural racers forming up at the starting line. His Honda looked pathetic among them, a discount store toy surrounded by weapons of war. But as he pulled into position, Jake felt something shift in his engine's core. The modification wasn't just absorbing supernatural energy anymore. It was learning, adapting, evolving. The blue phosphorescence under his hood pulsed like a heartbeat, and suddenly he could sense the network of energy connecting all the possessed vehicles around him. They thought his modification was a key that had unlocked their prison. But what if they were wrong? What if it wasn't a key at all, but a lock? The starting signal came without warning, a pulse of pure darkness that made reality flicker. Jake floored the accelerator, and his Honda shot forward with impossible speed. The supernatural racers closed in around him like a pack of predators, their vehicles phasing in out of solid matter, taking turns that should have sent them flying into the barriers. But Jake's modification was changing the rules of engagement. Every time one of the possessed cars made contact with his Honda's energy field, something transferred between them. Not damage, information. His engine was learning their weaknesses, mapping their supernatural network, finding the source code that bound them to this reality. As they screamed through the bank turn at 200 miles per hour, Jake realized the truth that had been staring him in the face for weeks. His modification hadn't accidentally unlocked a prison. It had been designed to. By whom, he didn't know. But whoever had hidden those impossible equations in his grandfather's old mechanics manual had planned for this moment. The finish line approached, but Jake knew the real race wasn't about crossing it first. It was about surviving long enough to reverse engineer what he'd unleashed. The Hunter entities had made one crucial mistake. They'd given him direct access to their network. Now he just had to figure out how to use it before they tore him apart. The ancient engine beneath the warehouse floor pulsed with malevolent energy, its crystalline core spinning faster with each passing second. Jake could feel the wrongness of it in his bones, the way it twisted reality around itself like a cancer in the fabric of existence. The collective's remaining members formed a protective circle around their prize, their eyes reflecting the same unnatural glow. "You cannot comprehend what you're attempting to destroy," Vex called out, his voice carrying harmonics that made Jake's teeth ache. This technology could revolutionize everything: transportation, energy, the very limits of human potential. "By ripping holes in reality?" Jake shouted back, checking the improvised explosive device he'd cobbled together from scrap metal and the unstable quantum cells from his engine. "I've seen what this thing does. It doesn't just bend physics, it breaks them." Sarah flanked left while Marcus took the right, their modified vehicles idling with predatory patience. The warehouse had become a tomb of shadows and impossible geometry, walls seeming to stretch and contract with the engine's rhythm. Jake's own car responded to the ancient machine's presence, its quantum-enhanced systems creating feedback loops that made his vision blur. The first collective operative moved with inhuman speed, crossing 30 feet in what seemed like a single step. Sarah intercepted him, her nitrous system screaming as she used her car like a battering ram. The impact should have been fatal, but the figure rolled with fluid grace, landing in a crouch that defied several laws of physics. "They're not entirely human anymore," Marcus warned through the comm system Jake had rigged. "The exposure to quantum fields has changed them." Jake gunned his engine, the modified system responding with a surge of power that felt like riding lightning. He aimed straight for the ancient machine, but Vex stepped into his path, moving with the same impossible speed as his subordinate. At the last second, Jake yanked the wheel hard left, using his car's enhanced momentum to execute a drift that should have been impossible at that velocity. The maneuver bought him precious seconds, but the collective was adapting. Two more figures emerged from the shadows, their movements coordinated with mechanical precision. One leaped directly onto Jake's hood, fingers extended like claws that sparked against the metal. Jake hit the brakes hard, then gunned it again, using the whiplash effect to throw his attacker clear. "Jake, the resonance is building." Sarah's voice crackled with static. "Whatever you're going to do it now." The ancient engine had begun to sing, a low, thrumming note that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Cracks appeared in the warehouse walls, not from structural damage, but from reality itself beginning to fray. Through those gaps, Jake caught glimpses of something vast and hungry stirring in the spaces between dimensions. He swerved around Sarah's position as she engaged two collective members simultaneously, her driving elevated to an art form as she used physics and momentum like weapons. Marcus provided cover fire from his modified paintball gun, loaded with quantum-disrupting compounds Jake had synthesized from his engine's waste byproducts. The explosive device felt heavy in Jake's pocket as he made his final approach to the ancient machine. Vex materialized beside his car window, somehow matching his speed while running on foot. The collective leader's hand punched through the reinforced glass like it was tissue paper. "You would doom your entire species to preserve your ignorance," Vex snarled, his grip closing around Jake's throat. Jake smiled grimly and held up the dead man's switch he'd been palming. "Maybe, but I won't let you doom them with forbidden knowledge." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Vex's inhuman features. Jake used that moment of hesitation to slam his elbow into the collective leader's wrist, breaking his grip. With his other hand, he yanked the wheel hard right, sending the car into a controlled spin that ended with Vex sprawled across the warehouse floor. The ancient engine loomed before him now, its crystalline core pulsing with the rhythm of a dying star. Jake could feel its influence trying to worm into his mind, promising power beyond imagination, knowledge that would reshape civilization itself. For a heartbeat he wavered. What if Vex was right? What if destroying this was the real mistake? Then he remembered the tears in reality, the hungry thing stirring beyond the boundaries of the world, the way the collective members' humanity had been burned away by their exposure to forces they couldn't truly control. Some doors were meant to stay closed. Jake triggered the explosive as he dove from his still-moving car. The device wasn't large enough to destroy the ancient engine outright, but Jake had designed it specifically to disrupt quantum fields. The resulting explosion was more implosion than blast, a sphere of twisted space-time that collapsed in on itself and took the crystalline core with it. The warehouse shuddered as reality snapped back into its proper configuration. The surviving collective members screamed as their enhanced abilities abandoned them, leaving them merely human once more. In the sudden silence that followed, Jake heard the most beautiful sound in the world, his engine's normal physics obeying rumble as Sarah and Marcus pulled up beside him.